What's going on? This is the Saturday Down South podcast. I am Connor O'Gara. Will, I am back. We are back. Excellent time. Was gone for, 9 days? 9 days. It's a long time. It was a really long time. By the way, the pod schedule got a little bit weird. I know some of you might have seen like the way that it came out on Monday and then Tuesday again. That was not the initial plan. Miscommunication on the back end of everything of when that was released and all that. So apologies if you had set your watch to that and it was different than what you saw. But yeah, that was the byproduct of us not being on our usual schedule. But yeah, back after spending 9 days in Indy and in Lexington, getting to see family, get Claire to meet her grandpa, cousins, all that stuff. So it's good, man. I feel very refreshed right now, which even after a week and a half of parenting consecutively, which usually I don't do because she goes to daycare.
Right.
I feel refreshed. I feel very good right now.
So what was the response? How did she do with the family? Was she affable? Was she cute? Was she barfing on everyone? What was the review?
It was adorable.
Okay.
This is adorable. I mean, she got to meet her cousins for the first time. I have a niece and a nephew I've talked about. Lauren's sister has Collins, who's 2 years old, and then Cohen is their youngest, who's 4.5 months old. That's what we talked about before with Lad of the Week and how ironic it was that my first nephew is named Cohen. Very ironic. Not quite Liam Cohen. Doesn't really look like him. But yeah, it was great. It was great. I mean, Claire was awesome. Great on the plane, by the way. That is the most daunting thing ever, of taking your child on the plane for the very first time. And we had no idea how she would be, because while I do think she's a great baby overall and she's been kind to us, Lauren and I always joke, like, what's the phrase, like, God gives his toughest challenges to his strongest soldiers.
Yep.
She's like the easiest. So what does that say about us? Probably
you guys were prepared. That's the thing. See, I think the second one, if you guys choose to have a second one, that's going to be the coin flip. I think that's usually how it goes. Then you'll be prepared and it'll be like, wait, now here's one for you.
That's the guaranteed Hellraiser. No doubt about it. But yeah, she was awesome on the plane. Like, slept for about half of the trip and everything like that. And like, had people that were next to us in rows over that complimented her and talked about how great of a baby she was on the plane, because they definitely thought to themselves, oh my God, I'm about to be right next to this 8.5-month-old baby. I don't know how they knew how old my baby was. That's a little weird. But they definitely had that thought when they got on the plane. So that was huge relief. The challenge
for you guys too, like, you had her a little bit later in life, and like, I know you're a big routine guy, you like things a certain way. So I'm sure I'll tell myself here, whenever I see a baby, I'm like, oh, get a grip. Cause I don't have kids, so it's kind of one thing if you're like, you have a kid at 21, 22, and it's like, okay, they're kind of figured it out. But if you've lived a whole life being like, oh dang, there's a baby there, and then you're the one introducing the baby, it's put up or shut up time.
Yeah, trust me. Like, I've got plenty of experience of this, traveling in and out of Orlando. I know all too well what that experience is like, to be next to a kid on an airplane. And thankfully, she did not make it difficult. I was really, really grateful for that. That took away a lot of our stress. The challenge was driving. Because Lexington and Indy are about 3 hours apart. We flew into Indy, and then we drove the 3 hours to Lexington the next day to be able to spend the weekend with my brother and his wife. And it was awesome. Also got to spend a little bit of time with Brock Vandegrift. That's for a story that's going to be coming out, I believe, end of this week. Yeah, end of this week is the tentative plan for that. Nothing in podcast form or anything like that. Got to know him a little bit better, and that was a great experience overall. It was great to be able to see those people at Kentucky again. But yeah, the trip overall, like, that was the only work thing I did basically the entire time. Was that interview, and then everything else I was trying to be as present as humanly possible. And yeah, being able to do that was excellent. Being an uncle is awesome. I love being a dad. Being a dad is the absolute best. It is everything that everybody says it is, and so joyful. Being an uncle is unbelievably cool as well, and was really enjoying getting to do that. So yeah, man, it was lovely. Absolutely lovely, and I'm very grateful that I got to spend that time away and feeling good. Needed a little bit of mental reset, and we we got just that.
Cool, man. Yeah, that's always good to see. And since we're not talking Vandergriff, I'll just ask you this: what was meeting him like? Like, was he standing when he met you? He feels like a strong handshake guy.
Dude, he's a big mother trucker. He is big. He's like, there are certain guys that when I meet them, I always think to myself, you're not as big as you're listed. He is every bit of that, like 6'4", 6'5". And I know I'm short. I'm 5'8.5". Big old handshake, just a country boy who looks the part in every single way. And that's with a lesser version of his beard too. So it's not even, he cut his hair at the recommendation of David Cutcliffe, actually. And he's got like a more trimmed down beard as well. You can see, I tweeted out the picture of us. But yeah, he is like, I instantly thought to myself, that guy is a big boy. I mean, is huge. And not just because he loves lifting weights. Like, it's not just that, like his frame is just naturally like massive. So any sort of trepidation about that, I would say Kentucky fans, you're good. That won't be size will not be an issue with Brock Vandegrift.
Confirmed large human. Yeah, and while you were gone, I got to go on a couple of little trips. I actually was in Orlando. I was bummed that we couldn't hang out, but you were flying out while I was flying in. Then I went to Austin last week, and I got to meet some elephants. That was super cool.
Oh, okay. Like, when you say meet, and by the way, we're going to get to actual football stuff in a minute here, but when you say meet elephants, what's that interaction like?
Oh man, so I went to this elephant preserve in like Texas, and it was funny because it was kind of like on the side near Texas A&M, and there was a ton of people with like A&M gear, and the dude like hosting it, I swear he was a yell leader. Like, he had the exact prototype. He was out there talking to the elephants, like giving little cheers and stuff. I'm like, oh my gosh, what is going on here? I started to text you because I was like, this can't be real. This is like getting a yell leader to introduce me to elephants. But it was super chill, man. There were 3 of them. They were all females. So there was no drama. And, we just over like, territory and stuff. And, we got to give one of them a bath with a brush. It got to touch their hooves or their little pads. And they did art. We bought some elephant art in purple and gold. So it was a super cool time. I can't, they're really well taken care of. They live like way longer in captivity than they do out in the wild, but you get to learn a lot of cool stuff and meet some really cool elephants, man.
At no point in my experience seeing elephants at the zoo, we went to the Indianapolis Zoo as well. That was one of the things we were able to do. At no point did I look at those elephants and think to myself, I could be doing art with them. You were able to experience that. That is very unique. Gosh.
Yeah. They're like modern day dinosaurs, man. I learned so much about their keystone species. They predict all these other species. So yeah, they're just super cool. It's just like, I don't know. I didn't realize how much maybe my hatred for Alabama has caused me to just subconsciously not like elephants. It's not the elephant's fault, ladies and gentlemen. The elephants are cool.
Did you get a Roll Tide tattoo by the end of it too? Or no, you're
good. No. But shout out to that yell leader. He was really excited. He made it a really fun time.
We got a great show today. Jim Cavale, he's going to join us in a bit, talk about the significance of the Tennessee versus the NCAA ruling, what it means for college football's future. We're going to end with Jersey contest, Lad of the Week. But we're doing Since I've Been Gone. I know we've done that a few times before. I hope Kelly Clarkson doesn't sue copyright infringement. I don't think that works for podcast titles, but whatever the case, we're going to save the Tennessee versus the NCAA ruling for Jim Cavale, so we won't discuss that the first part. 25 minutes is more than enough on that, so I don't want to repeat myself. But basically, this is everything that I wanted to weigh in on and didn't really have the platform while we were away. And thank you to those who reached out about the time capsule episode that we did.
People love that. Yeah,
it was fun. It was a lot of fun. So thank you if you said kind words, and no thank you if you didn't say kind words about that. But I was glad that we got to do something like that, especially ahead of a week and a half away. So maybe the biggest news outside of the Tennessee thing, NCAA 25. It has every FBS team in there. Genius marketing to have that announcement. And then every FBS program gets to like tweet out, post like, we're in the game. Like, that's no brainer. Really, really smart move by the EAA team to do that. You've got individual programs, individual players that are tweeting all this. It's just free marketing that they are able to get kind of like all day, really all week. It felt like for so many people, July 12th, that expected release date, it cannot get here soon enough. I've got mostly positive thoughts about that. Don't want to be a wet blanket necessarily. I know for many it's going to be an excuse to transport back to a different time. And that's what it's kind of going to feel like, I think, because for a lot of us, the last time we played this game, we were at a very different point of our lives. And a lot has happened in the last 10 years, probably life changes and all those different things. We'll see how much that drives the willingness for some of us that are a little bit on the older end of that typical demo to be able to get back into things. But, it will be widely celebrated for the foreseeable future. The pushback for the $600, I don't want to call it an NIL deal, but basically players are getting a copy of the game and $600 to be a part of the game if they opt in to having their name, their likeness used. That is something that I think if you look at on the surface, you can scoff at it and say that EA is just robbing players, not treating them fairly. And then it gets into this whole discussion about why aren't players valued in the same way that they are at the NFL and NBA and all those things.
Because of a players union.
Yeah, that.
To me, it's pretty one-to-one.
pretty one-to-one. Yes, that's 100% true. It also feels like something that someone lacking an understanding of the cultural relevance of this game would say. Imagine being a right guard for Akron, shout out Joe Moorhead, and you're told that you're making $600 and getting a copy of the game that you will be in. That is incredible. I realize that even if you're someone like, let's say, Harold Perkins, who will easily be the most fun defensive player to be in this game, and it's not even close in my opinion, like that might not be relative to what all of your other NIL deals are, but EA doesn't need to break the bank because of how long awaited this is. There is major FOMO if you're not going to be a part of this game. And I can guarantee you that there are FCS programs right now going, oh God, this sucks. This is a real bummer to see all these. I wish we had joined FBS when we took the plunge. I bet James Madison fans are feeling really great that their team actually took the plunge and joined FBS and didn't just hang out in FCS.
Yeah, a lot of those like conference tweets have been really funny too, where it's like an FCS conference is like, what about us? It was one with like SpongeBob like celebrating, or Squidward watching SpongeBob and Patrick celebrate. It's like, oh,
that's sad. That's really sad. Hopefully, we still get some Kibble Dome in there. Little Idaho action. Maybe they can be worked out. I don't know. We'll see.
Mark Schlereth, stand up.
Yes, of course. Great Idaho grad. I don't know if he graduated from there. No idea whatsoever.
Yeah, who would I talk to about this stuff if you've been?
I know,
yes,
seriously.
That's where you went.
But yeah, this just isn't a typical NIL deal, so you really shouldn't look at it through that lens. This isn't like the local taco joint offering lunch once a week and hoping that an All-American is on board. That's not what this is at all. It's an extremely unique situation. And based on the reaction that we're seeing from guys so far, there is overwhelming support from players to be represented in this game in its well-documented return. My go-to teams for this game, talked about this a little bit before, but now that we kind of have the current context with current rosters, Arizona would be fun because my love of Noah Fafita, you're at a talent disadvantage, so you can kind of justify it a little bit more. Same thing with Colorado. Obviously, you got Shedeur, Travis Hunter, who's opted into the game. Plus, you would get shots of Dion on the sideline. He better be wearing that cowboy hat. You get to run out with Ralphie. As I mentioned last year with Ari Wasserman, that's tough to beat, even if you're a hater of all things Dion. Like, you've got to admit that's pretty cool. The backdrop of Colorado with Boulder, it just sets up really, really well. Sneaky fun team, Kansas. Jalen Daniels coming back. Yes, Jalen Daniels, not Jaden Daniels. If I had to talk about him regularly, I would definitely mess that up. But I have realized now, as a 33-year-old adult, that I need to have a different approach. Back when I was an 18-year-old who loved his Florida dynasty with Tebow and Percy Harvin, and that was such a fun team to be. Brandon Spikes, I think, was the guy I usually was on defense, if I'm not mistaken. But 33-year-old Connor's like, look, you got to build it up. You got to have the program that's at a disadvantage, and it's a little bit more satisfying. You can't just be like, and I get it. If you want to do the season or the dynasty where you're your own team because of how cool that's going to be, you're going to do that for a little bit. Fully expect a lot of people to do that, and then you're going to be looking elsewhere, right? You're going to be finding that other, like, I'm never the Cubs in baseball video games, like, ever. I don't know why that is. It's just more fun because you get to see other stadiums, other rosters, stuff like that. But yeah, those would kind of be my go-tos. Do you have any teams that kind of immediately came to mind when you saw that all FBS programs are in?
I think Tennessee is going to be fun.
Mm.
I think with that, I want to see that playbook translated digitally. I just like what the formations are called, just like how it runs. I'm really fascinated to see what their no huddle options are, because that's just
Yeah.
obviously a way bigger deal in college than it is in the pros. And I'm totally speaking on my butt here, and I'll tell you the same thing that my buddy who is not involved on this team works at EA tells me: just go follow Matt Brown. He has all the official
Friend of the
stuff.
show.
Like,
Yeah.
well, my buddies are driving him insane because they keep asking him questions. He just keeps saying, "Follow Matt Brown." I can't tell you, and so very pro move by him. But yeah, I don't know anything, but I would hope they kind of rebuild that, because some teams, right, they lean on that. They do it completely differently. So yeah, I think that would be pretty cool. Another one, Ole Miss, I think is going to be fire. Yeah. I think with the jerseys, I hope they get to put, the dog in there. I hope
Lane throwing the clipboard. If you get that, like randomly one touchdown a year where Lane just chucks the clipboard into the air, that would be incredible too.
Yeah, I mean the you don't have to go all the way and get the dunker hoop, but I would like a fire extinguisher. I think that one's around to say. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think they'll, so yeah. There's a couple SEC teams. I think that the new. I mean, hey. These are the conferences we used to make in NCAA back in the day anyway, right? It's just kill one of them, split all the good teams up. So we really don't have to do as much conference like tinkering. But, the team I would always go with for that reason, actually. So you're right. It's like you get your team, you beat the mess out of everybody, you go back and beat the teams that beat your team. And then, you pick another team. And I hate to say regrettably, but, there are only a couple BYU, Notre Dame. I would often play with Notre Dame because they had a wide open schedule. So you could go in. You didn't have to do a lot of work to build your own schedule with Notre Dame. So usually, you go, okay, my team, figure out the game, Notre Dame, play all the hard teams in a row, and then let me just go get San Jose State and see how far I can take it.
Yeah. You saying Ole Miss reminded me that I would do so much Wildcat with JJ Pegues. Like an unhealthy amount of Wildcat with him. Oh, every single time. I'm changing. Will he have those capabilities? I think you can do that. Gosh, yeah. I mean,
you can change people's positions, but the thing is, if they've shown it in a game, you got to have it. Like he's attempted passes. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I would think that you would have to have that. But you're right about the conditioning aspect of, look, Tennessee runs this up tempo offense. I would hope that would be in the video game, and you can do this and not have the entire offensive line just absolutely gassed or something like that. Their conditioning levels would have to be really good. I think I saw that as well. It might have been Matt Brown who reported that they're going to try and incorporate what types of offenses these teams run and try and make it the base playbook for these teams as well, which is a really cool feature because, well, it does feel like there's less of a difference across the country with the various offenses that they run. They're a little bit more synonymous, interchangeable. That would be a cool thing to kind of see incorporated into the game. And it's, like one of those things that you're just like, hey, I love running this offense. So I want to be this specific team because it just matches their personnel, and you recruit to that. You do all those things. All that really exciting. And everything that you brought up, yes, I agree 100%. And gosh, it's making me excited just thinking about it. It's cool that we're going to see a bunch of these personalities in the game, the media personalities as well, fully on board with all of that. I get that they're putting College Game Day in there, so have that crew in, understand it. But the list of people I'd rather have in the game instead of Desmond Howard, it's a long list, Will. It's long. I came up with the list. Then I decided to hold off on sharing it because it was such a long list and I didn't want to forget anyone. So wanted to throw that out there. I'm a bigger Desmond Howard hater than most. Also, put women in the game. Put women in the game. Yeah. People like Holly Bro, Molly McGrath, Maria Taylor, Jenny Dell, Chris Budden, Lissa Lang, Laura Rutledge. They are a major part of this sport, and they deserve to be represented. And it would be a shame if that oversight was there. It just shouldn't be. Women are a big part of college football, and they should be able to kind of have that voice, that presence, because why wouldn't they? I don't really understand that. And I know that several of those people that I just mentioned there have brought that up. So hopefully that's going to be a part of it. But I don't know. It doesn't look like it, because if all those other people like, Fowler and Reese Davis have announced like that they're part of the game,
Yeah.
maybe that timeline has already passed and they can't make that happen. But
Yeah, I mean, Pollock's in there. So that's going to be a little bit awkward, I feel, because
yeah,
he's not with the crew anymore,
yeah. And like Pollock doesn't even really do college football content anymore. I mean, like that's just not his thing. Like
Yeah.
he's doing his Family Goals podcast. Like, and I get that he occasionally goes on shows anymore, but like, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think he is contracted by a specific college football entity. And so I wonder if that will be like a 1-year thing, and then they put McAfee in there. I don't know. I have no idea. But it is weird, kind of the timing of
It's a percentage thing. McAfee's just pushing a wild conspiracy on the sidelines. Virtual Pat McAfee would be a menace. Tampering.
McAfee is shirtless the entire time, or wearing nothing but a black tank top. He's since gotten away from that. I think ESPN kind of was like, I get that it's your thing, but you got to wear something besides that. Yeah, but you're not a cartoon character. You can wear other clothes. I promise you.
Right.
I'm sure there's going to be other gripes about the game itself. There inevitably will be. Nothing has 100% approval rating in this day and age. But the good news is that this game looks like it is going to be very successful. It should be, the popularity of it. And video games add to the popularity of the sport. They really do. And I am here for all of that. I will admit, I haven't played a video game at my house in 10 years. Okay. This is the first time that I have thought about splurging for a system and playing it on my own instead of just doing it at a buddy's house. I have not had that thought in a very, very long time. Like since I was 23, even when I was 24, I was like, I feel like I'm just wasting my time at this point. This doesn't really feel like a waste of time. It feels like something new. And I know a lot of people are excited about it.
Yeah, the online dynasties are going to go crazy. I mean, like from guys that, like you said, normally wouldn't care. I mean, like the technology was just there to do that for about a year or two. You know, you fully just build your program, you do your recruiting, but like having my like grown-up friends in here just lying to made-up recruits so that we can play like one season of a dynasty is going to be so electric. People that are like, mid-managers / executives at big companies just like lying to made-up kids like while their wives are just like doing stuff in the other room. That's so funny to me. But for 1 year, we're all just going to get an amnesty. It's like, hey, this is the first time in 10. Relive your childhood. Let's go. And I think that's fun. Yeah.
Just treat it like you treat, the Olympics or something. It's like, yeah, it's a Tuesday afternoon. You bet I'm watching curling instead of working right now. Okay.
Oh yeah.
It just happens every so often. I think a lot of people will be on board with that, especially with the timing of it mid-July. Buddy, what else are you doing? Come on. Let's be honest. 14-team playoff. It might happen, according to ESPN. It's weird to think that we're not even at the 12-team playoff officially, or at least the first season of that. But because the current changes only go through the 2025 season, college football leaders reportedly gain momentum to see the field expanded to 14. Already? What? Here's the thing. If you're okay with 12, but not okay with 14, ask yourself this. What did you think was about to happen? The reason people resisted expansion was because it just never stops.
Mm-hmm.
College basketball, like the sport that has a postseason with 68 teams, they're in the news over the weekend because apparently NCAA president Charlie Baker is like, hey, maybe we're going to expand some more. Going to expand to 96 teams. Expansion to 12 didn't mean that we were going to get to this place where the rest of the 21st century would just be a 12-team playoff. Okay. I hate to break that news to the purists of the sport, which I sometimes side with, and I sometimes side with as it relates to the playoff. So if that's your gripe, I would say that you're a bit naive about this whole thing. Having said that, I'm wildly intrigued at what those parameters would look like if we did have the 14-team playoff. Would it be the Big Ten and the SEC each getting 4 auto bids and then 2 auto bids apiece for the ACC and Big 12? Would they actually agree to that? I'm not a big auto bid guy in that sense because I believe there have been years like this one where there wasn't some massive separation between the conferences, even if I believe that it's undeniable that the SEC has been the premier conference in the sport for the last 2 decades. That's also why it's silly that if this were a field of 6, every Power 5 conference, the way that it used to be known, wanted an auto bid with one going to the group of 5. I hated that too, but we're past that, thankfully.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about the core 4 now. We're on to 12, maybe 14 as soon as the 2026 season rolls around. If adding 2 more teams to the playoff field is the last straw for you as a college football fan, I'd say you probably haven't been paying attention anyway, because this was somewhat inevitable as we get into this pay for play era, and the funding is going to be more directly tied to the player compensation, that media contract, that playoff contract. Those are going to be huge, huge things that move the needles and fuel a lot of these decisions just in the way that they have for the last 10 years. So weird headline, weird timing of it, but like it's kind of inevitable. And I think something that we all need to open our minds up to if we are still somehow close to it.
Yeah, I understand how funny and ironic the visual is of me wearing a UCF jersey and campaigning against playoff expansion. But I think that this eventuality is why I wasn't crazy about the 12 team, because I knew it's all just capitalism in a hat, right? I mean, it's not about the athletes. It's not about the schools. It's not about any of this stuff but money. And I think that what you end up doing is devaluing regular season. I'm not going to get my soapbox again, but you see it, all these leagues that have devalued the regular season by expanding the playoffs. I mean, dude, look at the place that baseball is in right now, where it's just like the regular season barely matters at all, because if you get hot at the end of the season, I mean, how many teams have we seen that just figure it out kind of the last 2 weeks? They get hot, they ride that through the whole postseason. They're all wild card teams that used to never make it. Like if you go back and see like the Phillies, we were looking at this the other day, it took like the wild card expansion in the 90s for them to have like these tons of playoff playoff appearances, because you had to win your division, and that was like made the regular season, and I think that coincided with America falling in love with the NFL versus baseball, because the regular season matters in the NFL. Now they're doing their best to ruin that too, but see, fantasy football and gambling are going to keep that alive. So that's the deal. If you compare anything to the NFL, I think you're misguided, because the NFL is fundamentally just like a monolith water cooler thing at this point, whereas like you got to look at the NBA or other leagues where this has happened. So yeah, I think that's the big deal. And my gripe has always been the big teams never die. Now you beat Alabama and Tuscaloosa and you got to see them again, which is not what the sport's supposed to be about. But and the other part of it too is the NCAA just like kind of losing their grip on this whole thing and going after the wrong teams. I know you're gonna get into that in the interview, but it's just like, how can we take any of this stuff seriously when we don't know what conferences are going to look like in a year or two? We don't know what the NCAA is going to be in a year or two. So it's just like, yeah, let's just kind of, I mean, them floating this out this early is so arrogant to me. It's like, cool, let's just get all the cards on the table. Let's start. Let's do it.
NCAA doesn't control any of this though. So that doesn't matter. Like it's irrelevant. Those are two totally separate issues. So,
but that could be totally broken away by the time this goes. That's the deal, is that we're rapidly advancing towards that.
Yeah, we're definitely reaching a different place with the sport, who governs it, who is the governing body that oversees the good of it. And I know the Big Ten, SEC alliance, whatever you want to call it, union, that is
making an alliance with the Big Ten. Historically, a great idea.
Probably not. Yeah, thankfully no alliances formed while I was gone. Or at least I don't think any alliances formed while I was gone. But I understand all the gripes for those that didn't like the 12-team playoff to begin with, and now they see 14, you're like, oh my God, like when is this going to stop? Get it from that standpoint. Just don't get the whole like 12 was fine, but 14, no, that's too much. That's
right.
To me, that's not the correct take. This happened a while ago, but Bama has a play caller, offensive play caller. That is what.
Well, they have 5 of them. Yes.
No, they do not. They do not have 5 offensive play callers. Stop.
No,
you need to stop with this right now, because
okay.
You're going to get me fired up, because if we need to have a conversation about what a co-OC is, I've failed on this level on this podcast for the last 3 years, because Nick Sheridan is the guy. He is in the role of play caller. He is sharing the duty of OC in that title with Jamarcus Shepard, who also gets the promotion to co-OC. That doesn't matter for the sake of this discussion. Duties matter for the sake of this discussion. Nick Sheridan is calling plays for Kalen DeBoer. That's the only thing that actually matters. I have no idea whatsoever if Nick Sheridan will work out as a play caller. No idea. As much as I want to blame some of Indiana's 2021 issues on him, because I thought Penix regressed before he got hurt that season. That's why Sheridan got fired at season's end. He was also darn good as the primary play caller for Indiana in 2020, the year after DeBoer left. He was the youngest coordinator in the Big Ten. Penix liked Sheridan so much that he essentially linked up with him 3 different times. Even if you go back to the Tennessee stuff where he was a GA at Tennessee, but Mike DeBoer really delegated a lot of his quarterback stuff to a GA, which is rare, but that was just the way that things worked out with Sheridan. And that was his first kind of big break. Josh Dobbs loved Sheridan. Peyton Ramsey, who replaced Penix at IU, he raved about that guy. Like, take that for what it is, okay? That's quarterbacks like him. Big deal. I at least will applaud the approach. I like the approach. And I don't care. You can give everybody on your staff the title of co-OC. I will not care. I will care about who is actually calling plays, because I like the idea of running an offense with someone else handling primary play calling duties. Lane does it that way. Heupel does it that way. Drink now does it that way. Ryan Day is now even doing it that way. It allows those guys to be able to focus on all those other things while having a big picture view of the offense, because modern coaches deal with things that coaches didn't have to 10 years ago. And that's a big part about, we talked about this a lot. Okay. We talked about this a lot, and how that conversation has changed over the course of the last decade. The stat that we brought up, Jimbo Fisher is the last head coach to have primary play calling duties who won a national championship. That was 2013. So it's been a while. Okay. I like the DeBoer, who has just a mountain on his plate and a lot of questions to answer as the guy that's replacing the greatest coach in the history of this sport. I like that he looked at this situation and didn't say, ooh, now is my opportunity without Ryan Grubb to call my own plays and to see if that'll work out. I like that he looked at this and said, I got to get somebody that I trust to come in here and call plays, and so that I can focus on everything else. And even if I have 6 guys that have the title of co-OC, I have one calling plays, and that's going to be Nick Sheridan, and I sign off on that.
Yes, and I'm just messing with you. You know, sometimes
successfully, might I add.
See, that's the thing, is that I sometimes take my blessings for granted that I have someone who actually, like, your opinion matters in college football, and you take my opinion seriously. So sometimes I just say things that I'm messing with you. I'm like, wait, he actually cares what you have to say. Hold on, don't. But yeah, but see, that's good. That was a good exercise, because then it's like, you're right. Okay, so having. And the joke about 5 coordinators, there's 2 guys who share defensive coordinator title, and there's 3 guys on offense who share some. Well, there's 2 co-coordinators, and there's DeBoer, who probably has a hand in it. But that is a good distinction. That's why I did it that way, because there is but one play caller, right? Which is different from, I would assume, we talked about 2019 LSU was the only time I could really remember this happening, when you had like a run, like 2 guys truly that were co-OCs. Doesn't actually feel like that's the situation here. Feels like there's one play caller and a couple of like dudes who help out. I don't know.
Exactly. That's in you're part of those meetings, and you form the offensive game plan, and you do all those things. And not to say that I know what every co-OC is doing on a daily basis, or even on what they're doing on Saturdays, but it's who's your primary play caller? Who's the person that is responsible, that is dialing up these looks? And it's obviously still going to be DeBoer's job to oversee what the offensive vision is in the game. Hey, I think we need to be doing more of this on 3rd and 5. Hey, I really think that we need to get this part of our game going. I've noticed something with the defense. Let's start leaning into this. They got a freshman safety out there. Let's take a shot over the top. These are the things that a head coach with an offensive background like DeBoer can implement and can say to his coordinator, who doesn't technically have full autonomy. Nick Sheridan doesn't have that. I won't pretend that he has full autonomy, but he does have the power to be able to call plays, at least if he's given the opportunities that Ryan Grubb were. And Ryan Grubb always talked about how DeBoer empowered him. And that, I think, is a really important thing. I realize this happened a while ago, and a lot of people have already weighed in on this, so apologies if this sounds like old news. But still, we have to at least bring that up, because it was left as kind of an open-ended thing the last time we talked, as far as, that was definitely left as an open-ended thing.
Yeah, and to give you my serious opinion, I totally agree. This is what we were saying, which is that DeBoer needs to get this stuff off of his plate as much as he can, and I think that's smart, and this is a smart way to do it, given that you had Grubb, who you trusted. Like I talked about, probably the way that me and John have our relationship, where it's like, like John did a shoot without me last Monday. I just wasn't there. I would never do that with anyone but him. And so when you have someone like Grubb that you trust almost completely, bringing in a couple of other voices to where you don't put all that on one guy actually is probably a pretty smart idea. So I like that hire. And to your point, someone who knows the system, really as good as you can do, honestly.
And I trust you so much that you trust John so much that John is producing a podcast for my aunt. That's a true story. That's a true story. Yeah. Great insight. I'll provide a shameless plug to that at some point down the road here. Other news, Shawn Elliott back to South Carolina. Friend of the show, Shawn Elliott, not the one who played on the Spurs, who hit that shot on Memorial Day. The Georgia State coach who looked like an uncaged lion before the start of games. That guy. He's
uncaged lion. I love that.
Yeah. A head coach in good standing left not for the NFL, but for a job as a tight ends coach at South Carolina. Huh. If you read the Chris Lowe story, you know that there's a bit more to it than that, because Elliott's family had actually been staying in Columbia since he left South Carolina. He was Spurrier's interim coach, but he left for that job at Georgia State 7 years ago. He said it was a personal decision, not a professional one, and that he considered not coaching at all. Make of what you will. How much of that was just being like, I'm spending all this time away from my family and I'm getting no closer to moving up the coaching ladder. I feel frustrated. I mean, his tailback leaves for Mizzou. That guy was a stud. And it probably feels like this sport is changing and he's not necessarily reaping the benefits of that. I don't know how much of that went into his decision. I know it is difficult to like be away from family during that time. Like I used to talk to Chiswick about that. Like when he had his first stint at UNC, he went and got like just an apartment that was a couple miles away from campus and would just fly back every weekend. Like how much stress that causes. It's just not an easy thing to do. So again, I'm not going to pretend that I know the ins and outs of his life or anything. What I do know is South Carolina needed help in the trenches badly. That has been my biggest knock of Beamer's team so far through 3 years. Shawn Elliott is helping you in the trenches. Go ask 2019 Tennessee about that. Top 40 rushing attack each of the last 5 seasons. Did you like how I just slid that in there? I didn't even get a reaction from you on that one. I thought I would.
I'm sorry. I was trying to put all this stuff together with South Carolina's tight ends have apparently gone through. Like I was like, wow, there's a lot going on in that room. Anyway, continue.
There was a dig. 2019 Tennessee who opened the season by losing at home to Georgia State and allowing. I think they allowed like 220 rushing yards that game or something like that. It was a lot.
That was a fun game. Yes. Look, I love Shawn Elliott. I respect the mess out of that guy. That's a great pickup.
We did, and it just meant more. Wherein Shawn Elliott was a guest, and Marler. I remember he just like. I remember that was the viewer's choice episode, and we said whichever comment in the Facebook group gets the most likes will be the game that we do for an It Just Meant More episode. And then that game won it. It was back in 2020.
It was like right after that game. I was like, which was so much funnier because it's like, yo, this happened the other day. Can you just talk about it really quick? That was so old. Like Online Savage is just like, you remember this? Some of those guys are still on the team. Talk about it, please.
It was great. And then Marler, like, it's like, why don't I just like try and slide in his DMs and see if Shawn Elliott wants to come on the show? And I was like, Marler, that's not like how it works. A little peel behind the onion. Usually when we're going through interviews for coaches, you're going through the SID. Like we're gonna have Jeff Collins on soon, and even though I know Jeff Collins, like I've texted with him, I'm still like going through the back end because the SID like sets up the schedule and does all that. And Shawn Elliott just responded to Marlo, was like, yeah, let's hop on tomorrow, let's make that work. Just kind of sight unseen, and had a lot of fun with that. Go back and listen to that podcast. But anyway, Shawn Elliott, really good at establishing the run because that's what he's done at Georgia State for the last 5 seasons when he had those top 40 rushing attacks. His duties are going to be improving that ground game. That is good news for Rocket Sanders in his first year at South Carolina. It is a tremendous hire for Shane Beamer ahead of what feels like a pivotal year for him. But holy cow, does that suck for Georgia State. Oh my goodness. They were two days into spring practice. They had to delay that. They had to delay the spring game. Absolutely awful timing. Good news is they hired Del McGee, who was on Kirby's staff each of the last 8 years. I think Georgia State's about to become one of these really popular destinations for some of those Georgia transfers, maybe some of those Bama transfers as well, who are looking for a new opportunity. Maybe even once that spring window opens up, you're going to see a lot of these guys that want to play for Del McGee. But one of those headlines, they're just like, wait, what? Shawn Elliott is leaving Georgia State to become the tight ends coach at South Carolina? Like, that doesn't make any sense, but makes a little bit more sense when you kind of understand the dynamics going into it.
Yes, and I will say, Dow Loggins' last stop was the tight ends coach at Arkansas, but he didn't really have a ton of experience doing that before then, so it's not like they're hiring someone over him.
Duties, Will. Exactly. That's what it's all about.
Yes, Dowell Loggins, famously a defense against the dark arts teacher previously, so he's had a lot of he's had a lot of stops before this. But that's not like a we don't trust Dowell Loggins. That's like a you just want like Arkansas wanted you on their staff. This is where you fit in. Versus you're a tight ends coach and they're bringing someone in over you. So it's a really good note to me. A good note who I had remembered him as a tight ends coach.
Yeah, it'll be probably more so about the blocking aspect of it, and
Yep,
and trying to help out a lot with the running backs and being able to get that off the ground. Speaking of South Carolina staff moves, James Coley leaves South Carolina to return to Georgia. Kirby just loves sticking it to Beamer, and vice versa, I think, as well. Your annual reminder that those two are not sharing a Verbo anytime soon. Coley had the job as South Carolina's receivers coach for like 6 weeks. That was about it. And instead of helping out a unit that had major questions, Kirby brought him back to that role as receivers coach. If you go back far enough, I've said some nice, well, let's call them not so nice things about James Coley on these airwaves. But those were all related to him as an OC who had gobs of talent to work with at Georgia. Yet far too often, it felt like his only way of dialing up a chunk passing play was Jake Fromm hitting someone with a back shoulder throw. That was my big critique of James Coley as an OC. And to be fair, Kirby saw it that same way, which is why he stripped him of his coordinator duties after that year and offered him a different role. Probably was going to be willing to keep a co-OC title for all I know. But then he's like, nah, let me bounce. I'm going to go to A&M. James Coley goes there. Kind of gets jerked around by Jimbo with the changing titles thing. Another reason why titles don't matter. Coley was A&M's co-OC the last 2 years, Will. Did you know that? No way.
Because he was with Jimbo Fisher.
Because co-OC doesn't matter, okay? Doesn't matter. So now Coley's back in the same role that he had at Georgia back in 2016, 2017. It's great for Georgia because he can recruit. That's what we know. That's going to be his primary responsibility. His duties are going to be getting into South Florida, getting into Georgia, and continuing this recruiting machine that Georgia has built. And he will be a tremendous asset. I don't know how much he's going to develop receivers or do any of that. I will refrain from saying bad things about James Coley so long as he, wait for it. This is difficult for me to say, but I'm going to say it. As long as he stays away from Mike Bobo's offense. Yeah. In the words...
For the time to be alive.
In the words of Orlando native Rob Thomas, let's see how far we've come.
What? Yeah, I mean, it's like Kirby is on some redemption tour where he's just like, all these coaches that have gotten yelled at, I'm putting them all on the staff. Muschamp, I know he's not there anymore, obviously, but it's
Analysts,
like, he's like, yeah, it's like, look, you guys have your opinions of these guys cemented, not so fast. We could win with anybody over here. And like, and you know what? Just to keep it a buck, when you think about, Hoover legend Pickens, think about Mecole Hardman, some of that stolen valor was given to Cortez Hankton as a receivers coach, but in reality, those guys were more of James Coley guys. He was there for like most of their time, and kind of, not that he was primary recruiter or anything, but helped get them in the building. So Georgia's receivers, I think, have kind of taken a step back since those are, when you talk about getting guys in, developing them, wide receivers, right? The tight ends obviously have picked up a lot of slack. The backs have picked up the slack, but just pure wide receivers, it's like, transfers and lad out there basically right now.
Is the one area that they have not truly dominated on the recruiting trail. It really is. It's not to say that they haven't had great receivers and just the way that the offense is constructed. Jaden Hazelwood came on these airwaves as a 5-star guy in the state of Georgia and talked about how, look, that's really not what they were known for. It's a program that's got one 1,000-yard receiver in program history, Terrence Edwards back in 2002. And guys kind of know that. And It's a little bit different. It's not to say that for all I know, they're about to go off on a significant run of having receivers selected in the top end of the NFL draft. And that's what the offense will be able to yield. But that has been, if there is one, kind of a knock on Georgia's recruiting. And James Coley, I think, will help in that area.
Who's the funniest coach you think they could add to this staff?
Ooh, that's a good question.
And why is it Todd Grantham?
Yeah, that's the only answer. Yeah, I'm trying to think because Grantham's always had a soft spot for Georgia.
Yeah.
He will not admit that because of like his time at Florida, but I know for a fact he has had a soft spot for Georgia since he has not been there. If it wouldn't surprise me at all if he still rooted for Georgia on a given college football Saturday, is what I'm saying. Yeah, he's the most funny. You're right. He would be the most funny. I don't think he's taking on any DC roles anytime soon, but yeah, who knows? Crazier things have happened. Crazy things that are happening to Georgia. Brock Bowers not being in the top 10 of mock drafts. It makes me angry just continuing to see this. And look, I'm not as plugged into that world, so I know some of these mock drafts are based on what you're hearing from front offices and stuff like that, and there's a lot of intel that goes into that. So I'm not saying that that's bogus or anything like that, but I just see this in too many places, and it makes me angry. I don't have to go too in depth on that because Lord knows if you did like a word cloud of things that have been said on this podcast, and somewhere very prominently you would see Bowers, and then probably right next to him, like human ? That would I'm pretty confident in that. But if the argument against Bowers going as like a top 10 pick or something like that is related to Kyle Pitts in any way, shape, or form, go directly to jail. Do not collect your $200 if you pass go. It is my least favorite draft take because of how different of players those two guys are, and because of the fact that Pitts played in an Arthur Smith offense. That is one giant asterisk. It's not quite Chad Morris levels of asterisk.
There's another guy.
Oh, Chad Morris going to Georgia.
Chad Morris to Georgia would be hilarious.
Kirby wins a national championship with Chad Morris as his OC.
Make him co-OC and don't let him do anything just to freak people.
The GOAT conversation is happening if he does that. Like Kirby's at the end of the game and he's just getting bored. He's just like, let me just bring Chad Morris in here and see if I can make this happen.
Just put him up there for press conferences. He has no idea what's going on in the offense. He's like, yeah, I think we're going to do some more zone concepts. Everyone's like, oh my God, what's going on? Anyway.
He's a co-OC with no duties whatsoever.
Yep.
Just all titles. That'd be remarkable. It really would be. But yeah, Bowers just shouldn't be falling below 10. And even as a Bears fan, when I see him falling past the Bears and going to like pick 16 or 17 or something like that, when the Bears have those obviously 2 picks in the top 10, I just get nauseous looking at that. But anyways, we'll have more draft discussion as we get deeper into the pre-draft season. So I'm sure I'll talk about Bowers at some point.
I'll say this really quick. I mean, I think Kyle Pitts was a fine draft pick. I think the Falcons are just stupid. I mean, look, as much of a, Florida fans can say whatever about me, I have never doubted that dude. That dude is nasty. And I think that they put him in like the only situation where the coach didn't walk in and go, who's that guy? We should throw him the ball like all the time. He's huge. He has great hands. Like that just shows how arrogant Arthur Smith was, because I drafted this guy in fantasy, like Kyle Pitts. I think he's a great player. And so like the concept of comparing those two guys, because the Falcons, who again, passed on Jalen Carter and stuff, not to get into all that, but it's not like they have a track record of being super smart. And then to your point about Bowers, it's like, he doesn't even have, it's a completely different player because he's always had that dog in him. He's always been a great blocker. He's always had that lower center of gravity. Not that he's small, but 6'4" versus 6'7" with bigger legs or 6'4" with bigger legs is definitely a different type of athlete. So yeah, I'm with you. The draft is the time of the year where we, again, the NFL guys that always kind of dump on college, we get to see how dumb they truly are in real time. You see Mac Jones going early, you see Trey Lance going early, and we're like, huh?
The Trey Lance one I'll never forgive. That one still just doesn't sit right. Different, very, very different storyline. One that I'm not sure a lot of people are talking about. Maybe not a lot of people care about, but I'll make you care after this 2 minutes. Desiree Reed-Francois, my favorite athletic director to pronounce, she left Mizzou for the same job at Arizona. This is going to sound weird because Reed-Francois, she was the AD who extended Drink in 2022. And it was a deal that kind of left all of us scratching our head at the time, and even going into last season. Maybe, yeah. I mean, they obviously since gave him a raise post 2023, so a little bit of a different story, but still, it felt strange. I don't think she was in his corner as much as that deal indicated. I had heard that she really didn't have the power that you'd think someone in her position would, as it relates to the biggest hire at the university, in the athletic department, obviously. And she actually was someone who wanted to part ways with Drink in 2022. interestingly enough. Um, but she was overruled. Mizzou obviously extended him in the middle of that 2022 season. And Tom Rackers wrote about this move for the Jefferson City News Tribune, support local journalism. The move looks weird on the surface in just about every way. For starters, she's taking a pay cut, which, if that doesn't raise
Arizona, you better be taking a pay cut, brother.
Well, yeah. I mean, look, I don't think you have to take a pay cut if you're going to Arizona, but it is.
Well, remember, they're like $500 million debt. So.
That's the other point, Will. They're dealing with all this debt. They're the ones that are joining a new conference. They just got out of the Pac-12. They're going to the Big 12, and they're dealing with all this debt. And Mizzou isn't faced with the same sort of financial issues that they are. And even though she, went to law school there, I don't know that that's all of a sudden like, oh, I got to return home. As Rackers noted, though, if you dig a little deeper, you see Mizzou's Board of Curators, which, what a title that is. Board of Curators. Love that. They hired an oversight committee for the athletic department. In other words, she's getting micromanaged a lot, okay? Mm-hmm. If you're suddenly reporting to people above you as an AD that are within the athletic department, it's one thing to report to a university president, chancellor, stuff like that. These are just basic power dynamics that go on at big-time public universities. It's one thing to understand that. But to have all of a sudden this oversight committee, weird, really, really weird move by Mizzou. And I'm not sure a lot of people care, but it's actually probably better for Drink's future. And the reason I wanted to bring it up, it's a reminder that ADs and presidents like being in control, which is why I will continue to bang the drum that the idea of all of them signing off on a college football commissioner, as great as it sounds in theory, is still pretty idealistic in actuality. Mm-hmm. And I don't necessarily think it's going to happen anytime soon. So sorry to burst that sort of bubble. Desiree Reed-Francois on the move, as everybody was talking about, I'm sure.
Yeah, I hate to be the guy that paints with a broad brush, but I mean, this is like one of the more common things that I've seen kind of like, women in power have to deal with, where it's like someone else made up this mess. Now you got to go come in and answer for it. And I think that, to your point, I think that it's her choice. And with the writing was kind of on the wall at Mizzou that things were not going to potentially go her way in a power struggle, but it just feels a little bit unfair that she's doing a great job as an AD and she gets tasked with this Arizona job that is just kind of like, how are you going to fix that? And like I said, it's her choice. She chose to leave. I understand that. But when you factor in what you just said, it's like, how do you do a good job at that school who is, going to the Big 12 in all this debt, just lost their football head coach. Like there's just, it's like the best athletic director you could ever think of. It would take him forever to get out of this. So it feels like it's just, we question some of her moves with Drink and all that, that great season kind of made all that make sense. But then now it's like, okay, well now you're leveling up and doing an even harder challenge. So I wish her luck because Arizona is a really awesome brand. One of my coworkers went to Arizona and they have a lot of school pride. And I think they're a school that's been historically pretty good at a couple of sports, which is really fun. So yeah, I'm interested to see what the direction of that athletic program is because it truly is. It could be anything.
Some are saying that she was shown 2 minutes of Noah Fafita film and she said, get me a U-Haul, get me to Tucson as soon as possible. I believe in this man and I don't care what sort of debt we're in. That man is going to get us out of it. Some are saying, I might be saying that. I don't know that that's a fact, but it wouldn't surprise me if that trickled out. Just saying.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
I hate to end on a sour note here, but we had the unfortunate news that I'm sure some of you saw. Alex Anstead, Keith Farner, Chris Marler were all laid off at SDS, all of whom were great parts of our team. And I'm bummed thinking about it, talking about it, because it sucks. Absolutely sucks. As many of you know who listen to the show, Marlon and I hosted this show from 2018, 2020. Maybe you started listening to the show back then. If you are, thank you. You're an OG listener. And even though we've been doing our own thing the last few years, I've still worked with Marler a lot on various things that we've done, under the SDS umbrella. And just, he was someone who taught me a lot about finding my voice, showing my personality, and doing a lot more of those things. And I know he's got some stuff in the works. You can still hear him talk about college football, how much he loves Shares, If I Could Turn Back Time. I will never meet anyone in this life who loves that song more than he does, including probably Cher herself. I'm very confident in saying that. But
Rhythm
it's a
of the
bummer.
Night, another one.
Yeah. Who could forget? Of course, bangers, nothing but bangers. But yeah, I'm gonna miss working with all three of those guys. I really am. We've been fortunate enough to avoid layoffs at SDS for really the last like 6 years, when it felt like, gosh, new headline here from The Athletic, ESPN, or this company, SB Nation went through their thing, like all these different companies in media that were going through layoffs. So we talked about the Sports Illustrated thing, and that was such a bummer. And it's just kind of a byproduct of the times, and it sucks. I know Paramount just announced a bunch of layoffs as well, and that team, and I know a lot of great people over there that are just kind of like looking around. It's a nature of the business that we have chosen to be in. It's unfortunate, and there are so many other things that control it. But I just want to say something, because a few of you have reached out to me and asked me about that. It would have felt strange not to address it because of how big those people have been for our company, and how big Marler was, obviously, on Saturday Down South podcast. So yeah, I just wanted to address that. And that happened like the day after I left. And I know the timing of that probably was a little bit weird. I was kind of off the grid for a little bit there, which is just unfortunate. And hopefully won't have too many of those conversations about layoffs moving forward. But yeah, it's a bummer, because they are tremendously valued, and they did great work for us.
Yeah, I heard great things about. I met Alex a couple of times. I follow him on Twitter. Obviously, kind of going back and forth. Keith, I'd like seen his work as well, but Marler was the guy I obviously knew the best. We came in together, and a lot of people don't know this, but so when the podcast initially started in 2015, 16, it was John Christ when he was the main host, and me, I was editing it, and so it was me, Kevin Duffy, our CEO, and then the host or talent was JC, John Christ. And, we all kind of came together at the same time, like me, you, and Marler. And one of the ideas that we had pitched was, you guys do kind of like a, like the new version of the podcast. And I remember I had worked with Marler on a lot of the branded stuff for Bud Light and everything. And it was it's gotta be a great fit and everything. And really advocated to get him on there. And it's crazy because me and you haven't even really talked about this, because I sent you a 15-minute voice memo about it, but then the iOS ate it. And so I was I was emotional. I was I'm not going to do this a second time. I'm just going to have to call you. But then we both went out of town. So point being, yeah, you're kind of getting this straight from me. But yeah, I was a really big part of both of our professional lives. It was definitely an era. I think that, trying to think about how to say this. I think that if we had known exactly how much time we would all have together, it would have been we would have had an opportunity to do a lot more things together. I feel the fact that it was always kind of okay, we're all doing individual projects, we're doing all this stuff. The times that we all did work together, I think were some of the most fun I ever had in my life. And I mean, because the thing is, you could kind of bring some of that structure, but then, when I was younger and we were doing these tailgate pieces with Marler, it was so crazy. There's stuff I'll say, because I work at TV now, and I'll talk about some of the stuff that we did, and people's jaws are just on the floor. You shot 16 30-second spots in the same day in a bar. It's yeah, we did. We sure did. We had a great time. We were laughing. Marler was sweating profusely. We were freaking out the whole time. We were flying for the seat of our pants. So it was a great way to come up and just see what we were capable of. We just all kept kind of betting on ourselves. And I think that the final version kind of the podcast ended up better for everybody, because, he had a vision of kind of being a little bit more off the cuff and stuff. And so I think it all just kind of worked out. But yeah, I'm super excited to see, what he has planned. So yeah, it's just a lot, I mean, when you think about how much time we spent all together working on stuff, pulling the same direction. And that was the cool thing about SDS back then. Some of the guys that were in that building, man, Justin King, Stoney, it was a really, really, really talented room when I first got there.
Yeah. And back when we were first launching this iteration, circa 2017, it was I hosted it with JC, with John Christ. And then when we pivoted to the idea that you suggested of having Marlon and I host this and you produce this, I'll never forget this. You and I might have shared this at some point, but you started a group text with me, you, and Marler, and you texted it was early January. You're hey, let's do a test run. When do you guys want to get this going? And I didn't respond for 6 or 7 hours, and I respond to this text, and I'm like, hey, let's do a test run, but let's do it next week because I was just at my dad's funeral. And that was a weird thing to say to a group text for the first time. Looking back on it, probably should have said, hey, I'm dealing with some personal stuff at home. But I definitely set the stage for awkwardness with that. But it opened up like so many opportunities for us to be able to do this. And I'm so grateful that you were the person that actually like had the vision to be able to do a different version of what we were doing in 2017. And for the better. I mean, I think that we've been able to grow and expand. And Marler's, even though he was doing his own things the last few years here, I think it was a great opportunity for both of us, and we recognize that as a key point. And if you consume Saturday Down South content as a result of listening to this show, I appreciate that. I appreciate that so much, and I'd like to think that we played a part in establishing the brand of what we are. And Marler was very much entrenched in that. I'm grateful that he was able to work here as long as we did. This sounds like a eulogy. That's not my intention. Much like that day when I gave my dad's eulogy, that we started that group text. But no, it is. It does feel like the end of a chapter, and I'm grateful that chapter at least was able to happen. And we'll move on, and I'm sure Marler's got big things in his future.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's go to Jim Cavale. Really smart dude on all things NIL, which I know people, you probably have some NIL fatigue and dealing with all this, this changing landscape of the sport. I totally get it, but the Tennessee ruling was so significant across the entire sport. So we dug into that. What does it mean for everything that could happen in the next few years? Important context to kind of understand if you are a fan of college football. So here's Jim. Now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is Jim Cavale of athletes.org. Jim, it's great to have you after what was really a landmark day for the future of college athletics. On Friday, we found out that a federal judge ruled in favor of Tennessee and against the NCAA in its attempt to enforce these interim NIL policies. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but this feels like an even more significant day for college athletics than when we found out that NIL in itself could actually exist. Because if the NCAA can't even enforce NIL rules, its role in college football without control of the postseason tournament, it feels completely minuscule. Is that a fair take?
Yeah, it's a fair take. And I think, when you look at college football, it's NIL plus the portal that has equaled the chaos. And the reality is the NCAA cannot regulate either, right? The portal, they cannot regulate according to the DOJ's judgment on you can't have non-competes on people that you say are non-employees. So you can't regulate the portal at all. And then more recently with Friday's ruling, you not only can't regulate NIL, but you can't even control if it's used as an inducement, which used to be at least one of the few rules the NCAA had for NIL across the board. Now, what I will say is these things do need to be regulated. And the only path for regulation is having the money not be NIL payments, but actual salaries or revenue sharing payments from the schools to the athlete, because at that point you would be able to then control their term, which is how long they'd be playing for their team. And you'd be able to limit transferring. You'd be able to require them to play in bowl games because it's tied to a game check. And you would really change this whole thing. The significance of Friday's decision, or the recent decision, I should say, depending on when this airs. Well, that decision really matters because it's another pain point now to try to get the leaders in college sports to embrace figuring this out.
I think everybody wants to know about the future, and understandably so, but is there any situation in which the NCAA could have walked away from this case with restored power? Like if the NCAA had just had better timing with the way that it came out right before the February signing day, and then like take it for what it is. Tennessee was like, hey, you're kind of screwing us with recruiting at this very important juncture. Take that for what it is with what the February signing days become. But like, was there any world in which the NCAA could have walked away from this feeling like, oh, we actually can enforce these things, and our interim policies, while they were very open ended, we could have actually stood on this, and a federal judge could have sided with the NCAA? Or was this just destined to happen, and this was always going to be this was always going to be the results if and when the NCAA barked up the wrong tree, which happened to be Tennessee?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think that there's two ways to look at this. The NCAA could have been more proactive starting in 2019 when the Fair Pay to Play Act was passed in California, which said that student athletes who play at schools in the state of California will be able to do NIL starting in July 2023. That's basically what the Fair Pay to Play Act said. When that happened, the NCAA could have sued the state of California and could have prolonged or maybe even won that lawsuit and been in a position on the offense to prevent NIL from happening. Instead, they sat there and NIL happened starting with that case, then state, California, but other states like Florida sped up the timeline to 2021 instead of 2023. And the NCAA ended up saying, we're going to set rules. Then they lost the Alston case right before July 2021 when NIL was set to begin. So they didn't set any rules. They just said, you set your own rules, just make sure there's no recruiting inducements. And, that didn't take long to spawn out of control. And so I think even if they were proactive, it would have ended up here. And I think the only way for them to be the governing body is the congressional protection that they so long to have, that the NFL and MLB and other leagues have gotten. But in this modern era, I don't think the NCAA will ever get, unless they change the status of student athletes and allow them to be paid from gross revenue in a fair manner and address the other benefits that all athletes should get, even if they're not in a revenue producing sport where they would get revenue sharing. They should have certain levels of medical coverage and mental health and concussion protocols, et cetera. If they could do all that in a deal with the athletes that would have different layers based on the sport and the conference and the different, aspects for each athlete, I think that deal could be an asset for the NCAA to get at least a safe harbor, if not antitrust protection from Congress. But they don't have that deal. And I don't think Congress is ever going to give them protection without it.
Yeah, and what would finance that? The NCAA tournament for college basketball? Because if you don't have that control,
that's the other issue. Yeah. So the other issue here is this is really more of a school by school and conference by conference issue, not an NCAA issue, aside from March Madness. In March Madness, revenue should be shared with men's and women's basketball players. Without them, you wouldn't have a multi-billion-dollar franchise in March Madness. But outside of that, really, this is a school by school issue, right? The median annual gross revenue of a power conference athletic program is over $125 million a year. And that's putting the Alabamas and Ohio States in the same bucket as the Washington States and the Oklahoma States. Some are above 200 million per year in annual revenue, and some are below 100 million in annual revenue per year. But the median is $125, $126 million. That pie has grown exponentially over the last 20 years. It was half that, 20 years ago. But the media deals got so big, and the conference media deals get shared equally with the schools, along with the March Madness deal and the CFP deal. And that money, along with ticket sales and other ancillary revenue at the school level, is what equals that $125, $126 million per year number. And as that pie has gotten bigger, the sliver that the athletes get, which is for their tuition to be paid and other benefits like cost of attendance, checks that they get to help live on, the expenses they have and stuff like that. That sliver has gotten really stayed the same size and almost gotten a little smaller. It's like 10% of gross revenue that's invested into the athletes. On the other side, the staff and coaches, salaries, benefits, and severance is more than 40% of the pie. So their slice has gotten bigger. And we've seen that with coach salaries going up and coach buyouts going up and all that. And it's the opposite of pro sports. In pro sports, 6% of the gross revenue goes to the staff and coaches, and 50% goes to the players. People say, well, these aren't pro athletes, but yet the revenues are comparable to pro revenues. And that's why this is being looked at in the House case, in the Johnson case, in the NLRB cases, the way it is. The comparisons that they're going to make are going to be to the NFL, the NBA, and those percentages and pieces of pie that the athletes get. So that's how we got here. Like, that's the reality of college sports. It doesn't matter like who created it, but I know I'm organizing athletes with Brandon Copeland, and we're trying to help college athletes be able to get that new deal. But we didn't create this. That was created by decisions, not just by the NCAA, but the conference and school level for decades, that got us to this point where the numbers are the numbers, and you can't create all this value without the athletes.
Go in any direction you want with this, because you're obviously very well prepared to answer a question with your background in NIL literacy and everything that has gone on to this new era of college athletics. But what's the most imminent next step? Is it college football successfully breaking away from the NCAA, fielding its own sort of enforcement agency with that new media contract to finance it? Is it unions for student athletes after the Dartmouth thing? Like, what is the most imminent next major domino to fall in college athletics, and maybe more specifically to college football as a whole?
Yeah, so I'm going to address a few things you brought up before I answer your question. College football splitting away is an idealistic concept, because it would allow football to be separate, not drive decisions like the Pac-12 destroying itself to go to the Big Ten, which was all about football and is going to affect track and field and gymnastics and other athletes who have to play, from Oregon, who have to play Rutgers on a Wednesday night now. But like separating it is ideal in a lot of ways. It solves issues with Title IX. It would allow all the sports to still be funded. It would allow college football, for the teams that would separate, to make a lot more money, because the best teams would be playing the best teams every weekend, and there'd be bigger media deals. It would allow the athletes to be employees of these for-profit entities that are separate from the school, and they can unionize, and you can have true collective bargaining. So there's a lot of things, but it's very idealistic. And so to go back to what you brought up, like, the presidents are in charge. That's who makes all the decisions, not the commissioners. The commissioners report to the presidents. Greg Sankey reports to a board of 16 now, with Oklahoma and Texas, presidents that have to have consensus to make decisions, and he drives those decisions, but he has to have their buy-in. And that's the same across every league. And so here we are. And what do the presidents want? They want to preserve higher education. They want to preserve academics being a part of the student athlete experience. They want to preserve some of these things from the past. And it's not that they can't be preserved, but they definitely cannot be preserved the way they're being preserved right now. And so I think we possibly will get to a place where football separates, but there's conference media deals and there's other things papered up that I think prolong us being able to do that. And that's what makes it idealistic, let alone the fact that the people who will have to make the decisions to do that are the presidents. So if you back up and you said the next thing to fall, the next thing to fall is the House case is going to settle. And when the House case settles, which it's supposed to start in January of next year, when the House case settles, right now, if it plays out, it's tied to $4.2 billion in damages, mainly related to 3 damages classes: football, men's basketball, women's basketball. And so those 3 groups of athletes going backwards, who are part of these massive multi-billion-dollar media deals as players playing in the broadcast and got nothing except their education and benefits, but didn't get to share in the revenue, those athletes are asking for damages. And if they win and it plays out, it's worth could be worth as much as $4.2 billion, which would really destroy the NCAA. But if they settle, it will still set precedents moving forward. It will, whatever they settle for is what will get paid to the, athletes that are part of the class in the lawsuit. But moving forward, we'll now have precedents. And then it's going to come down to, okay, let's say a precedent is that gross revenue has to be shared with these particular athletes. Like, how is that going to be structured? What's the minimum payment? What's the maximum payment? How's it paid? What's the transparency? How's it tied to a term? Does it limit what you can do now with NIL? Are there going to be non-competes where if you take money from revenue sharing, you can't take money from a collective? How does it play into benefits, medical coverage, mental health, field surface, all that stuff? You start to have a forced conversation around the collective bargaining table of contents that's already in the NBA or NFL or MLB's CBA, and now will be, at least for some athletes, if not all, thought through at the college level. And so I think that's the next big domino to fall. These other things that are happening are still important, but it's almost like, the leaders are being told, give up, say mercy, give up. And like each one is a domino. And I think they're giving up a little more on the route they were looking at. And the proactive ones are saying, we could do this and it could be this. Cause here's the thing, man, I think this is a win-win-win. And a lot of people don't. A lot of people think that it will destroy college sports to share money with athletes for a lot of reasons, including the math. Where's the money going to come from? If we don't do this, you're still going to figure out how to pay for the barber chair and the locker room. And you're going to figure out how to pay your coach $70 million for a buyout so you can get another coach that your fans are more excited about. So if you can figure that out, I think we can figure this out and still do those other things. And it can be a win-win-win. And of course, we're talking about the top 50, 60, 70 schools here when I say that. That's really what this is all about in those three sports. So anyways, I think that's the next big domino, the house case settling.
It's a great point. And I wonder, as it relates to NIL itself, if it's a bit like the scene in heavyweights where they finally take over and they overthrow the administration, like the Tony Perkis, the Lars, that group that comes in and they're trying to do things their own way, and they have this party and it's like, chocolate sauce being poured on everyone and they're eating pizzas and it's this wild scene. Like if NIL is just about to become that because the NCAA has been rendered powerless in this deal, and all of a sudden we're going to have a quarterback in 2026 who's fielding a $15 million offer. But do you think that collectives have already been sort of operating with that mindset, and we're not about to see some drastic boost in money being thrown around? Like, where does the NIL market really go from here?
Yeah, I don't really think that Friday's decision is that pivotal of a moment, because I think people have already been inducing athletes. And I also think that collectives have tapped out their donors. I'm not saying donors are not giving to their collectives anymore. I think, at the bigger schools, they are. But I mean, let's be honest, this has been happening for a while. And now it's out in the open, but it's still not out in the open from a standpoint of transparency. And, a lot of people will take On3's, projections of what an athlete can make and report it like they've already made it, right? And that's just part of the genius of On3 coming up with the valuation. And shout out to Shannon Terry and team. They've done a great job with it. But we don't know what athletes are making. They own the data from their deals. Okay. There's nothing that anybody can do except the federal government to change that, because it's protected by FERPA. It's their information. Same way our health information is protected by HIPAA. You don't know Aaron Rodgers' deal with State Farm. That's an NIL deal. You know Aaron Rodgers' contract with the Jets. And if we did revenue sharing with athletes from gross revenue, we would know athlete, X or Y's revenue from the school, but we still will never know what they make with NIL unless they tell us. And so it's still not going to be transparent because of that. Coaches are already tampering. They're only going to tamper more because they're going to say whatever an athlete wants to hear if they want that athlete to come to their school. And once they come to the school, whether or not the athlete gets what the coach promised remains to be seen. I don't think Jaden Rashada is an isolated situation. I think Jaden Rashada just asked to get out of his NLI, his National Letter of Intent, from Florida, and they didn't let him, so he went to the media. There's a lot of people who go somewhere, think they're getting one thing and don't, and leave, and you never hear about it. So empty promises to athletes, promising whatever they ask for just to get them to go to your school, tampering with them, stealing them from other schools, from peers of yours. That's all happening. And then we know the issues with serial transferring, bowl opt-outs. All of this can be solved by collective bargaining. Yeah. By gross revenue being collectively bargained to go to the athletes. It creates transparency, can limit the tampering. It can create a term that limits transferring because now the money you're making is tied to it. And I honestly believe if we figured that out, Nick Saban would still be coaching. He talked about it. Go pull it. May 2023, last year. He had a whole rant at SEC Media Days in Destin. If we're going to do it, let's do it all the way. Let's collectively bargain it, unionize it, create parity, make this fair. Right? I think if we figured that out, a lot of coaches, I think Boston College still has their head coach. I think Chip Kelly's still at UCLA. Right? But like a lot of guys are like, especially if you're the GOAT, you've been coaching for 17 years, you've won 7 national championships. Why deal with this? You know? And so college football is not broken in one sense because more people are watching it. Having Michigan and Washington in the game this year was great for the national presence that college football needs. The SEC has more parity than in recent years. Some people say it's down. I think it's just more even. But regardless of all that, like, it's broken in the standpoint of we're using NIL to do what we should be doing with gross revenue. And we're setting up side entities called collectives to fund with donor money, where donors get 0% of the ROI and the school gets all of it. And it's just being done in a way that's easy to tamper, easy to make empty promises, is going to create serial transferring with no commitments. And I think it's not sustainable.
I think we will look back on this very specific era of college football in the early 2020s with that mindset of like, oh my gosh, like we operated within those parameters. I put that in air quotes, and just tried to exist in this space. But it eventually can get us to a more stable place. And that's what I hope as a fan of college football. I'll let you get out on this one. Here's what I wonder about as you talk about transparency and you deal with this stuff and you deal with athletes who are trying to navigate the NIL space. And so much of this is happening in real time. But like, you know how recruits tweet out offer letters, right? Or what they perceive are offer letters. I wonder who's going to be the first. And maybe it's a situation where it's like, you know, a 20-year-old agent is advising a kid to do something like this. But who's going to be the first recruit to actually tweet out the financials tied to an offer? Because if we're saying that the NCAA can no longer weigh in and enforce NIL rules, and obviously, you know, you're trying to do right by the school, but I wonder if there's going to be someone willing to do that and trying to create their own leverage, knowing that they're not going to get their school in trouble. They might have a talking to, but I mean, the school can even publicly refute anything like that if they so desire. They can't mention recruits by name in that way. That's still against NCAA rules, whatever you want to call them anymore. Could that happen? Is there any world that we could get to a place where that transparency is a two-way street?
It's actually a really good point. And it's probably the biggest thing that came out of the most recent ruling that says you can't have rules and thus you can induce recruits is now, because it's officially allowed, athletes could go public with it to increase their value in the deal they end up getting. And it would be interesting to see if somebody tries that. You know, I think that they're already doing that in private. They're telling other coaches, here's what I'm being offered or whatever. And coaches are definitely more careful with each other, opposing coaches, than they've ever been before because of that. But I could totally see an athlete doing that. And, you know, this period of time we're in that you brought up, kind of a good way to tie all this together. It's, you know, we're just in a limbo kind of purgatory phase, but there is a heaven that awaits. And, you know, there's always going to be more money on the table from a media standpoint, even in this new streaming era for live college football. The NFL's lowest viewed game beats the highest viewed college game just about every week. And the NFL has more $10 billion more dollars per year for media deals coming in than college. And it's because we still have, you know, Tennessee, Chattanooga, and Alabama playing games against each other, let alone the lack of parity there even is sometimes in one conference between the best and worst teams. The NCAA or college football, has, you know, mostly double-digit spreads. It's too wide to have fantasy. You know, I think a lot of this can be developed without it being a full pro league, where you have that Ohio State Notre Dame game that was really good last year, or that Alabama LSU game that was really good last year, or that Michigan Ohio State game that was really good last year, 15 times a week, every weekend. and viewership will continue to grow, and there'll be more dollars for the schools that we're talking about. A lot of people are like, well, that's those schools. The other schools in the bottom half of the FBS are already struggling. And the athletes that play at those schools, let alone the coaches, are not going to make as much as the athletes in these bigger schools will make, because they're tied to conferences with bigger media deals, right? So like, this stuff has math and formulas that can be applied to it that already work in pro sports, and so we're just in limbo, and there's a heaven that awaits for college football that's going to be even better than it already is right now. And we've just got to work hard to get there and get the most fair, equitable deal for everyone, including the athletes.
Jim, this has been great. Where can people get involved with what you and Brandon are doing at athletes.org?
Yeah, just go to athletes.org. You can learn more about us. We are the Players Association for College Athletes. We have chapters based on sport and conference that allow athletes to live in small groups: SEC football, ACC men's basketball, Big Ten women's basketball. All those groups have their own chapters. And should unionization be required because athletes become employees, our chapters will become unions. Right now, we're technically not a union. We're just a players association, but we are preparing for the potential of employment and unionization for college athletes so that we can have them together in a group. And we do three things: we maximize their income, we amplify their voice, and we support them in key decisions. And these are things we're already doing for our current member base, which we have thousands of athletes that are already a part of athletes.org. We're 6 months old, and we're really excited about the future. You can follow us also, like athletes.org, on all the social channels, and follow the journey. And if you know college athletes, it's free. Tell them to sign up.
Jim, great stuff, man. We'll do this again soon.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Jersey contest, talked about earlier. That is a Mackenzie Milton jersey. Does it have Mackenzie Milton on the back? Does it? Or does
heavens,
that
no.
Okay,
This is pre-NIL. Remember, that was like the 2017 season. This is a number 10 UCF jersey. This kind of just goes to show like how far UCF has come as a program, because this is very much just like a bootleg jersey that I got going to a game one day. And this is a team that very much looks like, what I'm saying, a little bit of a American Conference team, what I'm saying, that like has just kind of like these big bars on it and everything. And the distance their jerseys went, the distance their program went, have all been kind of due to a couple of people, one of which was number 10, Mackenzie Milton. And, how all these roads kind of cross again, KZ beating Gus Malzahn and Auburn in that Peach Bowl, springboarding UCF to the top of the, conversation in 2017. The way that SDS kind of positioned that was actually one of the smarter things they've done. Shout out Coop, the way he Coop, as we talked about, was as a UCF alum, and the way that we were able to talk about UCF and make them part of they were kind of this, for one side of the argument, a hero for the left out people, and then for the SEC and the people that were included, because the SEC had 2 teams in the college football playoff that year. It was a representation of, these guys couldn't play ball in the SEC. And it's all kind of it's all kind of leveled off since then. So I think it's interesting in that UCF fans are realizing what bowl game Gus Malzahn is like now. He's not a great coach. He's I tell them that's you guys realize kind of why we talked about this the way we did at the time, right? You see in these games against Duke and stuff, but point being, this is just the last kind of before times college football piece of memorabilia. I have, I guess, Burrow's stuff too. But this is just a happier time. I got this from my buddy's buddy. He just gave it to me one day at one of, I'm trying to think about which game it was. Matter of fact, it was the Boise State game, I feel, or maybe it was one before that, actually, the Stanford game in 2019 is what it was. And so point being, this has just been a cool little thing to, whenever I go to UCF, I just throw on the jersey. It looks like a Saints jersey, just so I could fit in. I have a jersey from each of my friends' teams in case I need to go be a fan for a day. That's one thing, right? You can either root for your friends' teams or against your friends' teams. Go ahead.
Your friends do a great job at that. Great job at that. I'm not sure how common that is for people listening to this who have friends that will support their interest and not just bust their chops. My friends and I do not do that whatsoever.
Yeah.
Every time Indiana basketball beats Iowa, I text the most disgusting picture of Fran McCaffrey that I can find on the internet every single time. But your buddies will go to an LSU game and like your buddy Brady will be rocking an LSU jersey, even though he's a UCF guy, and then vice versa. That's very cool, and I think very unique. Like, dude supporting dudes, that's got to be like a top 5 percentile type thing that you just do not see very often.
Yeah, it's super cool because, you know, he's like has the most objectively annoying combination of sports teams he can. He's a Philly guy who went to UCF.
Yeah.
So it's pretty rough. But, you know, at the same time, though, you know, it's one of those things where his family's in Louisiana. I was in Orlando, so it's really easy. So it does depend on the team. You know what I'm saying? Like, I was sitting there talking to him about, like, you get why people hate the Eagles, right? Like, you get, like, the tush, but you get it. Like, it's not, I'm not going to sit here and cap for your team. But, you know, if I feel like they're being treated unfairly, which rarely happens to Philly, but, like, UCF's thing, it's like, hey, like, I can kind of tell you, you know, my perspective on this without being a hater. And I think that's kept me really grounded and really objective. And why when people talk about me as an LSU fan, I joke a lot on here, but when it really comes to, like, being real about my team and their expectations, having friends from these different backgrounds, or it's like, I got to defend this stuff. And then I have my buddy Peyton, who's the biggest homer of all time. And so it's just a nice little group, you know?
UCF doesn't totally contradict your Full Sail fandom as a Full Sail graduate, which is the good thing as well. No sort of rivalries within, you know, like the Full Sail program, the journalism program. What is it? The Dan Patrick School of Sports Broadcasting.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily step on the toes. I don't know if UCF offers anything like that. As far as I'm concerned.
They have like a journalism program for sure, but Full Sail is just a little bit different. And that's the cool thing. You know, I technically still have 4 years of college eligibility because I went to an art school. So, you know, if Vandy wants to call me up to go hit some people, I could do that. But yeah,
Buddy,
I think,
they might.
Yeah, right. Look, I got no name on my jersey right now. So point being, like, I think that that's another side of it that's been cool. That's just like, you know, my buddy went the state school route, I went the art school route. We all just supported each other the whole time. So yeah, that they do kind of miss each other in a way. Like, they're not, LSU and UCF aren't rivals. I also went to the the PlayStation, like the Fiesta Bowl in Arizona, and that was one of the best games of my life. Got to see Joe Burrow's breakout party and the hit and everything, and that was like the coming to earth part. Like, I guess this is growing up for him, where I was like, dude, you're just not going to win all of these. Like, you've seen wins for like 2 years now, and you're just not going to win all these games. This is what being a good team is. So it's been a really cool little foil of our friendship, and I like to, you know, I'll be a Georgia fan for a day. It just depends on what your team is. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, Will is that guy. As much as Will comes across as a hater on the app formerly known as Twitter, Will is very supportive of his friends. I can definitely confirm. Lad of the week. I have a Will.
Okay.
It is not you. It is not you. Sorry. Will Wellens is Lauren's boss, and he, every time we go out of town, he house sits / cat sits for us. Like, usually like brings in recycling cans, waters plants, does the whole deal. Takes care of our home while we are away, and I am very, very grateful for that, because he has done that pretty much at every turn. We always get him like a gift card, something like that, or buy him a dinner, or whatever the case may be. But we'll come over like every single day and text photos of Rudy or something like that, which I don't think you can take that for granted. I think that is one of the underrated things about being an adult, is having a reliable house sitter, or, you know, whatever you need occupied, if you a dog sitter, you know, a pet sitter, whatever the case may be. If you need peace of mind to be out of town and you put trust in someone, that is a difficult thing to find, that a lot of people, I'm sure, are still searching for. Maybe you know, if you board your dog, but you know, you have a reliable neighbor that'll go over to your house or something like that, but never have to worry about that with him, which is really, really convenient for us. And the daily pictures are a must, like, especially if you've got an older pet, you know, getting up there in age, can't have an Angela Dwight situation with the cat showing up in the freezer. Just can't have that. So appreciate the daily text.
Yeah, people's relationships with animals are so funny, right? Like, you have people that like super care about their pets. You got people like my mom who are just like, oh, that's cute, and they just keep moving. So you want someone who really understands your priorities as a house sitter, for sure.
Yeah, it's big. It's all about peace of mind. That's really what it comes down to. But when above and beyond, I would give nothing but a 5-star review to Will as a house sitter.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm gonna go a little bit off the board here. You know, a ton has happens to where here I could get all metaphysical, but I think we'll just do a fun one this week. My live of the week is Tim Meza. Did you see this? This guy lost his fantasy football league, and so he had to put his fantasy football record on his spring training jersey.
Oh no! Is this a guy that's trying to make it to the big leagues and he's like on his way up, or is this an established big league player?
Yeah, I think he's just on the way up. He's definitely not a star or anything, but he's on the Blue Jays. And the back of his jersey, I got a video here. It just says 4-10. So that's commitment to the bit. That is loud of the week. It's like, hey, your buddies might have like corporate jobs or whatever's going on. You got to wear that punishment just like everybody else. And it's kind of funny talking about NCAA like we were earlier. It's like, hey, these fantasy football punishments, like I couldn't spend 24 hours at a Waffle House in my current level of employment, probably, And so it's really cool to see someone who's like out there trying to get it. It's like, look, dude, hand up. We got the clothing people figured out. We got it cleared with the team. I'm going to follow through with my word. So just dudes being dudes, man. You just love to see that where some things are so simple, or some things are so serious and some things are so not. And it's just cool to keep that levity.
It is a tough look. It's a tough look for those who are evaluating you as a next level prospect, and being like, I got this window of my life to establish myself as a big league player, and I got 4-10 because I lost my fantasy football league. That's just hanging on the back of my jersey. It's tough. It's a tough look. There's more than enough room on those jerseys now that the letters are so unbelievably small. What a bad look. I hate it. I absolutely hate it. I know I've talked about like my unwillingness to buy jerseys anymore, especially of current players. That is fully pushing me out. Is those teeny tiny numbers? Like what? I don't get it. I don't get it.
The pic of the two Dodgers free agents looking like me after 2 hours dancing at a wedding, because you can see under their jerseys. They have like the tail of the jerseys covering up their junk, and you can see the whole thing under. It's like you look like you've already pre-sweated through this jersey, and you're like an athletic dude. So yeah, it's baseball's in an interesting spot right now. But yeah, and funny enough, like I'm usually pretty like I've only missed the fantasy playoffs like 1 year in my main league.
Sick brag.
And well, this year I was horrible, but the bit going forward is I've always been the one trying to like push a punishment, and everybody in my league is just kind of like, I don't know. Like we always get to about 50% because we do league votes and everything. And like this year, I was laughing my butt off. I was going, y'all should have agreed to this freaking punishment because this is the one year y'all could have got me. I drafted Nick Chubb. I had Derrick Henry as a keeper. My whole team. I drafted Kyle Pitts, Trevor Lawrence. This is the worst fantasy team I've ever seen in my life. Let alone had. But I was sitting there going, y'all can't shame me because I was trying to get y'all to vote on a punishment, and y'all didn't do it. And now I'm trash, and I don't even care because I was trying to punish y'all when you guys were trash. So, I think next year we'll get our punishments figured out. But, hey, this guy stuck to it.
Could have been you wearing the 4-10 on the back of your jersey, spring training in beautiful Dunedin, Florida, future retirement home of my family, hopefully one day, watching this guy, heckling him about his fantasy football team. Can you heckle him for that? I think you can.
I just think that's cool. But what would be our version of that? I mean, would you like have to go on Feinbaum with 4-10 on you?
Oh yeah, probably. Yeah, that'd probably be something like that. Oof. I don't think I would do an L just on my forehead. That's a little bit too out there. But it's not very far off of that. It's definitely not. I don't have the same sort of platform that that he does, playing in front of the very loyal fans in Dunedin that have 40,000 fans every single. They don't actually have that. Don't get it twisted. I don't know if spring training is really. It's definitely the vibe for the punishment. I don't know that spring training as a whole is the vibe for the heckling, which is where I would struggle if I saw someone with 4-10 because of his fantasy football league on the back of his jersey.
Oh, let me clean something up really quick. I only saw this guy's years of service. I did not see his age. This guy, he has a spot in the rotation, but he is 32 and has only been in the bigs for 6 seasons. AKA, he's been up and down a lot. So yeah, it's like he's finally gotten to where he's in a good place. That's almost worse because he's like, like your age, basically. It's like, dang, this is where I should be reaping it in.
Back when I was with the Indianapolis Indians, we would always talk about the classic 4A player. The 4A player, that tweener, that AAA major league guy that just goes back and forth. John Bowker was a great one back in the day, former Barry Bonds disciple with the Giants, who later came on board with the Pirates and spent time in AAA with the Indians. That's a good one. Alex Presley. Now I'm just naming former Indianapolis Indians. We won't do that. Randy Johnson. That's the last one. Former Indianapolis Indians. People forget he was drafted by the Expos. That was when the Indians were an Expos affiliate. We don't need to get into that. I think that'll do it. That's where I'll cut myself off for today. Leave us a 5-star review. Subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch every episode of the Saturday Down South podcast. Follow us on the app formerly known as Twitter, at the SDS Pod, at Sat Down South, at CJ O'Gara, at Go So Hard. Thanks, guys. Talk soon.